Next, we're going to move on to Adam Roberti as the Director of Cortada Projects. Adam uses the power of art to engage Miami in learning about and addressing important ecological concerns, including climate change, sea level rise, and biodiversity loss. Cortada Projects aims to build community and transform citizens into stewards of the environment. In 2019, Adam oversaw the development and implementation across Miami-Dade County of Cortada's Plant Project. That's Plan and then T. Hey Adam, Nick. Hey, when you go to start the video, just do start video only, not start video and audio.
Got it.
You are now rejoining the main conference.
Rules to facilitate climate conversation, help sequester carbon dioxide, and grow Miami's salt-tolerant native tree canopy. Adam holds a Bachelor's in Arts in Ecosystem Science and Policy and a Master's of Environment, Culture, and Media from the University of Miami. Adam, you're up.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Awesome. Well, hello everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm sure you're a little curious as to what a Cortada is, as it says that I'm the director of Cortada Projects. The man that you see there is Xavier Cortada. He is a professor at the University of Miami, where I graduated from, and he is an artist. And I work with him in developing and implementing his participatory eco-art projects. And so as an artist, he does a lot of different things, from traditional art to more of these participatory projects. And so I oversee that entire realm of his career. And so I guess what I'm going to try to do real quick is just sum up how I got to this point, and then what it is really that we do, and then some advice or some jumping off points from what we do that can help you guys along. So I'm a resident and basically born and raised in South Florida here. I got my scuba certification back when I was 12. And when I was young, I really wanted to be an underwater photographer, and then that turned into wanting to be a scuba instructor, and then that turned into wanting to be a marine biologist. And so I went to the University of Miami with the intention of becoming a marine biologist. And it's while I was there that I realized that we have a lot of really, really good science, but the biggest problems that we're facing, i.e. climate change, seem to be more of a communication problem. In my mind, there was an abundance of evidence, of knowledge around the existential threat that is the climate crisis, yet nothing is happening, right? I mean, this was a few years ago, which blew my mind. So I transitioned from marine biology into ecosystem science and policy, so that was my major, and I actually got a theater minor at UM, which was fun, so that was a little bit of the arts in there. And then that took me into my master's at UM, which is a brand new program that they started about 2 years ago called Environment, Culture, and Media. And long story short, it's an interdisciplinary master's that focuses on environmental communication, but it definitely has a heavy emphasis on culture. The director of the program is an anthropologist, but then it does have this media component, so understanding communication strategies, how do we use social media, how do we use mass media, and how do we really get this message out and communicate with people, because the scientists that study climate change are having a difficult time communicating it effectively to our country at this moment. The name of the master's program is Environment, Culture, and Media, to answer your question on the chat. So anyway, it was through that master's program that I actually got a job at UM in the Office of Sustainability, and through that job I met the guy that you see on your screen, which is Xavier Cortada. So in the Office of Sustainability, I became the communications and outreach coordinator. So I was making videos and writing stories, and I ended up interviewing Xavier as one of our green champions, so somebody that was doing great green things on campus. And it was then that he kind of turned the tables on me and was interviewing me, and basically offered me an internship with him, where originally I was only going to be overseeing, say, his next big project. But over a couple of months, that actually transitioned into a full-time position overseeing all of his projects. And so what you can see here is a couple of those projects that started back in 2007, 2008. So this is long before many people were talking about climate change. You can see the longitudinal installation is a performative piece that he did literally at the South Pole. which is about generating empathy, and it's supposed to do this via the lines of longitude. So he's literally at the South Pole, and each of those shoes represent one of 24 people who have been impacted by global climate change. And again, this was back in 2007. And then the following year, he went to the North Pole, and he started Native Flags, which is a reforestation effort that he brought back to Miami. And the idea is that you plant a native tree next to a native flag, that one, the green one that you see right there, as a way to grow the native tree canopy, but also start conversation. So when people see that flag, they ask you, what is this all about? And this is something that actually Xavier has been very successful with throughout Miami-Dade County. He partnered with the Miami-Dade County school system, and every year for the past decade, every single public school in Miami-Dade County, which is about 330, has planted a native tree and a native flag on their campus. So that's an awesome project that he did that continues to this very day. Now, although he does do these performative installation type pieces, he also does traditional work. So when he was at the North Pole and at the South Pole, he created, and what you see here is his Antarctic ice paintings, where he literally took soil, he took ice from these places and created more traditional works, which you can see him there with Governor Christ and Governor Schwarzenegger, as a way to really get this conversation going at higher levels, because he obviously wants individual change and individual action. He wants to create a cadre of environmental stewards, right? So EcoEmissaries, as he likes to call it. And what we do is, for example, taking traditional art like that, but then actually activating it and mobilizing it and turning it into a proactive, engaged project. So what you see here is a project that he started a couple years ago called the Underwater Homeowners Association. And the Underwater Homeowners Association basically has you take a yard sign, and the yard sign that you would have in your front yard that normally would say, vote for so-and-so, or it would say for sale. And instead of saying that, it's a yard sign that has your elevation on it. And so that number 8 right there means that that house is 8 feet above sea level, but you wouldn't necessarily know that just by looking at it. And so you talk to your neighbor about what this sign is. And again, what Xavier is trying to do is start these conversations so that this can spread organically, because through my master's, one of the biggest things that I found that I learned was that people, when you start talking to them about climate change, will frequently just put up a wall and not want to listen to you because it can be overwhelming, or they think that it's some type of propaganda, people just tend to shut it down immediately without really listening. But if you're a neighbor and you are talking to your other neighbor, you're not expecting that this art piece is going to lead into some climate change conversation. And you're also not going to think, if you're a neighbor, you don't expect to learn that is your elevation right there. You don't. Most people don't know how high their house is above sea level. And so anyway, I've just told you about 3 projects really briefly, and we do a number of them, and I could take a long time talking about all of them. But long story short, what Xavier wanted to do was take all of these and put them underneath an umbrella, because he was very successful with the projects individually. However, he wanted more people, more teachers, more librarians, more museums to be able to engage with them, and for there to be one central local hub to access all of these things. So he created Cortada Projects, and that's where I come into play. So with me as the director and our team of University of Miami students, FIU students, we are able to take Xavier's practice and grow it to a place where he didn't necessarily have the capacity to as an individual artist. So now he has this team working for him. And what I did with these students over the past year is this plant project. This has been our central focus. And plant, I'm assuming most people are not from South Florida on this call, so you would not have seen it. But if you're from Miami, you more than likely would have seen this installation somewhere around the county. And this is an installation of red mangrove propagules. And mangrove propagules turn into mangrove trees, which are salt tolerant. And that is the main reason why we're using them here, is because this is the future tree canopy of Miami-Dade County. These are trees that will actually survive with sea level rise, with saltwater intrusion, not to mention how good they are at sequestering carbon dioxide. And so this is a simple installation that you see here, which is where we're based in Pinecrest Gardens in Miami. But there is a very participatory element to this art project, and this is where the social practice comes in. And what I really want to get across in this session here is socially engaged art, because it's not something that most people have heard of. I hadn't heard about it a couple years ago. And when I say that Xavier is an artist, he is a socially engaged artist, or a social practitioner. And this is something that, again, most people have no idea that even exists as something to be, right? And so what you see in this picture is socially engaged art in motion, right? So what we're doing is we have these families, these people in the community come, we give them a mangrove to take home and literally plant in their front yard. And you don't need to live by the water. They can live, as a salt-tolerant plant, they can live in fresh water, but they can also live in salt water. So that's kind of what makes them so cool. So we would give them this mangrove to plant at home, but in addition to that, we have them look up their elevation. So there's this app, and you could go on it right now, actually, if you wanted to open another tab. It's citizeneyes.org/app, and I can type it in the chat if you guys want. But basically, when you type your address into this app, it tells you how high your house is above sea level, so it gives you the actual elevation of your location. And then you can move that little bar that you see on the top there and show what Miami looks like with a certain amount of sea level rise. So right there you see what South Beach and the coast of Miami looks like with 6 feet of sea level rise, and the little red dot there is a part of Miami Beach that's sitting at 2.3 feet above sea level, which clearly is not going to do very well in the face of the climate catastrophe that we have. So as people get their number, so for example, the family finds out that they are 2.33 feet above sea level, they then take that and draw it on that flag that you see right here, and they plant that flag right next to the mangrove in their front yard, again as a way to start conversation. So you kind of get an idea of how an artist's practice builds on top of itself, right? So the native flag at the North Pole back in 2007, 2008, and how that transformed into the Underwater Homeowners Association, and how that has come to plant. And the reason that this project is called Plant is because we need to be planning and planting for the future of Miami. So you're planting a salt-tolerant tree that does sequester carbon dioxide, but really it is the tree that is going to survive as sea levels rise. And conceptually, when people start to understand what this means, you know, when you think of a mangrove, you think about it as something that lives along the water's edge, along the coastline. And we're trying to reframe the way that people think, such that they understand that the coastline, the water's edge, is beneath their feet and it's coming up. In South Florida, we live on limestone rock, and it is porous, and that means that it has a lot of holes in it, and so water just comes straight up. It's not just coming from the coastline. So people in the western part of the county that are further west in this picture are very, very vulnerable to sea level rise, even though they do not know that, right? And so this is something that needs to be dealt with quickly, rapidly, and you cannot communicate with so many people without starting to get creative. And that's why I started working with Xavier, was because of this technique that he uses to really hook you. And when I mentioned at the beginning of talking about Plant that if you lived in South Florida, you probably would have seen this installation, it's because that installation has gone into every single public library in Miami-Dade County. So through partnerships, we partnered with institutions, we partnered with schools. In terms of the libraries, and this is the picture that you see right here is actually the University of Miami's library. So in partnering with these organizations, with these institutions, we're able to get access to literally bring them an art project. Because, you know, if you think about it from their perspective, great, we get to hang art for what cost, you know, at what cost? It's free to them. We do all the work, we put the art up, and then when you're walking by, when you're this guy taking a stroll, you see these weird things that you have no idea what they are. You walk up to them, and then you guys can see in that picture there are little palm cards that are hanging right next to the mangroves. So then the mangroves pull you in, and now you are reading about climate change, saltwater intrusion, and you're urged to learn more and hopefully, be made curious by this installation. And in terms of the advice that I want to give, it's kind of what this picture represents, which is the partnerships that are so important, and the importance of really working within systems. So we've been so successful, not because Xavier's this amazing artist, although he's great, it's because he has gone out and created these connections, right? He's worked with the University of Miami. He's gotten connected with the Science Museum. So the Frost Science Museum is the big science museum here in Miami. So we have an installation there. In all of these libraries, in local public schools, in local private schools, in universities. So it's all over the place. And that's the idea. And then the idea for us come Earth Day was going to be for all of these mangroves to come down and then have the community take the mangroves off of this installation, for example, and take it home to plant. Now, luckily, we already deinstalled all of the public libraries came down in January because those had been up for a few months. So that process is over and those mangroves got planted, which is great. But a lot of these, which are up in schools and the University of Miami right here, all had to come down early and didn't necessarily, we didn't necessarily get to finish the project as we would have liked to, thanks to the pandemic that we're in right now. So we need to adapt. But if I'm one of you guys listening to this, I want you to hopefully reframe the way that you think about what art is, because on that beginning poll, I noticed that participatory was like the lowest thing. I think it had like 7% or something in terms of what you might be interested in. And hopefully this kind of shifts the way that you think about that, because it can be a very, very effective technique and method for engaging people, which is really what we need right now. Especially because you guys all have Instagram. If you don't have Facebook, you guys have some type of social media, TikTok, that can be an engagement platform, that can be a participatory eco-art platform if you choose it to be. So I think with that, I'm gonna end it. Thank you so much for listening to me, and let's keep fighting.
Great, thank you, Adam. That was very informative. You mentioned, you said socially engaged art is one thing you want us to get out of this, and I kept writing down different phrases such as, creating conversations, partnerships, connection, and it seems like that is, like everything is participatory in some way, and it's a good reminder of how we can change minds and inform people if we're getting engaged. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Now, I'll just check in, David, if we want to do a Q&A or if we need to move along at this point.
Yeah, let's go ahead and ask the top question. Again, everyone, as in the previous sessions, will be following up with each of the speakers with the questions that were asked, in particular to the ones that were specific to their presentation. But let's go ahead and ask one question to the entire panel.
Okay. Well, a lot of this was covered. One thing I wanted to connect more is because I love the fact that everybody is taking art and moving it on to multiple tasks. So I was just going to ask the group, what role should environmental art play in a digital society? And if any of our panelists want to comment on that.
I'm happy to jump in. I think...
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that in the digital society that we're in, it's really important, and kind of like I was just saying, for people to see it as a tool in their art making. So whether that's short videos, or people are very interested in photography, how they can take the photos that they use and repurpose them, or use Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator to really get creative, to get the message that we want to get out and really engage people who might not otherwise be engaged. But at the same time, in such a digital world, art making doesn't have to be digital at all, and it can be planting a mangrove and getting your fingers dirty. So I think that there's a nice contrast there into how you want to look at the issue.
Great. And Lydia, did you have anything you'd like to say about that as far as digital and environmental? I know you're using some of that with your AR, but is there anything?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is, can you hear me well?
Pretty good, yeah.
Okay. One is the tool, the digital being the actual medium, and then the other stuff getting all of one being digital being the actual medium that you use, such as when I use augmented reality or video, or I think now, for instance, I have a lot of friends who are painters, but some of them are actually like digital painters and mixing media, which is really cool now. A lot of people can get, and I encourage people to get really creative. And I love looking. I think in the age of social media, people getting super creative on TikTok or Instagram and how they use the tools to kind of like DIY, do it yourself with, like low budget filmmaking, but yeah, making it look really cool still. So I think one is the actual medium being digital, but I think the other is being super aware of whatever you create, how do you share that to a broader audience, and then using the digital tools, especially around social media, to spread it to as many people in a way that's engaging and meaningful. I wanted to say too, like not just digital medium being a visual tool, but for instance, with augmented reality, there's art around bringing data to life, and so that's a whole another field of merging data with visual art.
That's a really good point, is sometimes taking very complex, I think someone had said taking abstract ideas and converting that into a way that can be managed and understood. Jen, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I would just add that for us, and as Linda and Adam have already said, for us, a lot of it is just about communication. That having all these digital platforms adds one extra way of communicating with both the people that are people who direct in our lives, and then also acquaintances farther afield. And I think it's a great way to normalize a lot of these conversations. And so, it's a really easy way to spread what you're thinking about and what you're trying, what you might be doing. And the more people who are talking about, climate change and sea level rise and the mangroves they're planting and this cool mural that they saw and these great materials that they got, from the reuse center, the more that folks are talking about those things, the more they become a normal way that we're living their lives, and the more that people are likely to make those choices early on. And I think it can make a real difference.
That's great. Well, thank you. I think that's a true point when you talk about communication, and there's so much great art that's created that people just don't see. And I think all three of you have shown the importance of outreach and just going to where people are, essentially, whether that's online or in the community. And I think that may be all the time that we have for this. I believe you have everybody's contact info. If you've got the program, you have more questions. And so Linda, Jen, and Adam, from all of us, thank you so much